According to the Wall Street Journal and Kirkpatrick, we are being asked to seriously believe, drumroll, that the United States government has been lying to us about a cover-up about aliens for decades. Sorry, wait a sec. The US just said that it's been lying to us about a cover-up of aliens for decades. Well, duh, yeah, exactly. Of course they have. Why is that news?
Roswell, was that our saucer? They said it was a flying saucer, that a disc that had been crashed. A day later, they say it's a weather balloon. 20 years down the road, they say it's super duper secret weather balloon. And the bodies that people saw at the scene were crash test dummies that were dumped out of a plane 10 years after the Roswell incident. I mean, it's ridiculous. And, I'm reminded of the CIA study that came out in the mid-90s, and it was associated with Area 51. You got to meet, I think, you grilled the guy who wrote it, the CIA historian who wrote that report. He said, oh, yeah, all those UFOs you were seeing in the 60s and 70s, 50% of those are from us.
So to claim, as the Wall Street Journal does, that UFOs are a myth invented by U.S. military deception, it's not just historically inaccurate. It's intellectually lazy. It dismisses the depth of the military concern, all the scope of the evidence, and the sheer global consistency of this phenomenon. So it's not fantasy. This is reality, and has been recognized quietly by many of the world's most powerful institutions.
sDm Files, episode 19. Thanks for being with us. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with all your friends. Most definitely leave a comment. Come find me, x.com/shotdownmine. We will do the thing.
I don't think it's any coincidence that this dim-witted, moronic, block-headed Wall Street investigation appeared online at almost the exact time that another former senior Pentagon official entrusted with investigating UAPs, Jay Stratton, went loud and hard at the SCUAP conference at Huntsville with a detailed speech elaborating on past admissions he's made as a former director of the Pentagon's UAP task force that he is a first-hand witness to non-human intelligence. Quote, I have seen with my own eyes non-human craft and non-human beings, says Jay Stratton. That's pretty definitive. You will never read that anywhere in the Wall Street Journal, which has made it very, very clear with this story that it is happy to be a craven, toady mouthpiece for the national security state.
Ross Coulthart, News Nation, what the Wall Street Journal isn't telling you about UFOs. Reality check. What is going on here? Well, this week with everybody, everyone in ufology, even the debunkers. So all the different camps, all the different celebrities, all the different leaders, everyone has had to come out at some point over the last week or so and say and talk some shit about the Wall Street Journal article, which, yeah, I still haven't even read that. And I think, it was around the very beginning of the week, really, that I saw. It was around the very beginning of the week that I saw George Knapp post, 20-paragraph X post about the Wall Street Journal article. And it was the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of thing you see everywhere. Everyone didn't say I didn't want to read it, or I tried not to read it. But, that's what George Knapp said. He said he didn't want to read it. He tried not to read it. He kind of was not even going to read it at all. And that's what I was thinking. I was like, well, everyone's going to tell me what's in it. So he says he finally broke down and read it. And now he has to come out and say how much of a dirty pieces of yellow-bellied, no-good, scum-rotten, dirtbag dog shit the Wall Street Journal writers are. And that's what that's what Ross says too. He's a little bit more poetic, I guess, only because he talks in Australian, I think. And so basically, Wall Street Journal wrote an article that's not too long. You can read it. That says everything, all of the current era of ufology. The update that I would usually kind of refer to it as, that has started in 2017 with the New York Times article by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, and the emergence of the three videos, Gimbal, Go Fast, and Fleer, and Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon. So that's the current update ufology era that begins in 2017 with the article. And the Wall Street Journal says that, basically everything since that day has been complete trash. It's all been disinfo, that the Pentagon's been running a disinfo campaign, and that this is the results. This is it. And so everyone in ufology has been going ape shit. Last week I even covered it, so it must have come out that day or the day before. Because Polarity was just going nuts about the Wall Street Journal ad and saying, basically all the same things that you see all week long. Everyone in ufology has been saying that, this is low-hanging fruit, and they go through and basically say that everything is trash, and pretty much the only person, they said that they interviewed a lot of people, and a lot of people said that they were interviewed. Like George Knapp said that he talked to the guy on the phone for like 15 minutes, kind of understood where the guy was going with his questions, so didn't want to talk to him much more. But the only person who's really featured in the article is ufology villain, maybe number one at this point. He may have just jumped back up to number one, Sean Kirkpatrick. So he's what he says, obviously he spent hours and hours and hours with these journalists talking about everything in ufology. The way the article is written, it seems, is like Sean Kirkpatrick came in and found out all this shit. He discovered all this ufology stuff about the Pentagon running secret programs that they were hiding with lying about UFOs and aliens. And so, you could watch, like I said, you could watch hours and hours and hours this week of the ufologists. Most of ufology, even the debunkers, are shooting it down, and they're not shooting it down on that it's wrong. They're just shooting it down that it's so one-sided. Obviously, Green Street's taking a victory lap with it. Him and his pal Kirkpatrick, getting some licks of their own in on ufology. So this is Ross's kind of like official response to that. First, he spends, basically 6 minutes saying those guys are dirty, yellow belly, no good sons of bitches. And he also says, and they didn't debunk all the firsthand witnesses. And Ross doesn't say it, and no one else really says it, but everyone, the Wall Street Journal article talks about the official hazing policies that the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, the Air Force, and Army and the Navy had in place that had to do with new folks coming into these secret programs, getting exposed to UFO and alien propaganda that was untrue, called Yankee Blue. And then on top of that, the second part is that the Solace incident, where UFOs showed up and turned off 10 nuclear weapons, wasn't a UFO incident. It was real. It really happened. And it wasn't a UFO incident. It was a secret program that the government was running on itself to test deactivating nuclear weapons. And so in all of that, they never say that, all this other stuff, all these other people who've seen UFOs and aliens are wrong. They're just saying that's basically like a consequence of the Pentagon's disinformation psyop. So, anyways, what Ross does is he goes into first-person testimonies. He's got one fella on here who I think is Mario Woods. Yeah, Woods has encountered in 1977. He's going to be the corn-fed feller here on the right, who's like 70 years old. And so he was, working security detail. He's in, like they said, what was he? He's in the Air Force. He's working at the same Air Force base as Salas is commanding the missile silo, and has a encounter with. They never actually say, he saw a UFO, has an encounter with UFOs and aliens, basically, but ends up with lost time, and then he has a pal who I think he's calling Michael Jordan, who becomes completely catatonic, and after this incident disappears, never to be seen again to this day. And the other guy, Rob Heatherly, is there to talk about the ins and outs of the gigantic EMP experimental test weapon that they would have had to build there on the base in order to shoot the nukes with EMP and turn them off as the test that the Wall Street Journal claims happened instead of what Salas and basically this other guy, Woods and others said, happened when the UFO showed up at the nuclear base. And so it's no one has actually said that it's weird, because they really just kind of brought out their first-hand witnesses and said, look, there's all these problems with the article. But it's just weird that the article took that UFO case to make its case, against ufology. Even though they took on the 2017 article, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, all the videos, all the writers, everyone else in ufology since then. So they swung big, I guess, so they didn't really have to worry too much after that. But it's just weird that they went and picked out one kind of oddball case. Like they thought it was kind of like a low-hanging fruit, like an easy one to debunk, I guess, because it's got crazy-ass Salas in it. And even this, corn-fed guy here on the right, he's a little goofy. I don't remember where I've seen him before, probably just on News Nation. And I wanted to kind of go look him up and see where I'd seen him before, because I don't think it was like Sean Ryan's show or anything like that. But, he's a little bit goofy too. So I guess, maybe that's why they picked that story to kind of go after and debunk, because it would be easy. And since this is going to be written and most of the people are going to be reading it and paying close attention to it, and be reading it, way after today. And they might just be reading it. They're going to be watching 16 hours of ufologists bitch about it, probably. So maybe that's what's going on there. But anyways, Ross's response is to call him, a whole shitload of names, then bring on these two dudes to talk about the details of the, nuclear silo missiles being shut down, and that they're first-hand witnesses, and that they saw a lot more than what the Wall Street Journal article went about debunking. Let's see here. News Nation does a good job with these things. Heatherly gives his take. Everyone gives their take. Everyone hates the Wall Street Journal. They think that it's a rag. It's, what they've published up to date to this date makes them non-credible anyways. EMP test. The base that we're talking about is Malmstorm base, I guess. Malmstorm Airface Base. Incident. Robert Salas, who's commander of the nuclear missile silo there, says that UFOs showed up and turned off his missiles 10 out of 12 or something like that. A little bit of talk about Trump. Woods goes through his whole encounter. The government trying to discredit him. He says, I don't give a fuck. Medical records, can't get his medical records. All right, they say disclosure's coming. That's why, I think it's basically these guys saying it, but, it's evidence that disclosure is right around the corner, because there's such strong pushback, such strong attacks coming from places like the Wall Street Journal. And it is, it's interesting because it's, like, I don't think it was Ross Coulthart talking about it this week, because everyone in ufology was kind of bitching about this article nonstop, right? But they were calling the folks who wrote it, and I wonder if we can catch that. It's at the very beginning up here, right? Does it say Joel Sechtman and Aruna Vistawanatha? June 6th. The Pentagon disinformation that fueled America's UFO mythology. So George Knapp took issue with it being called mythology, firstly, and then also that he's calling these journalists here parachute journalists, that they're just kind of jumping over into the UFO topic for some quick, bang, and they'll be, and they spent a little time, they talked to 20 people, and they're experts now, and they solved everything, and they write this great article, and they'll be moving on to whatever they normally do anytime soon. And that may be true, but it's kind of weird that it's taken so long for the Wall Street Journal to write an article talking shit about Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo directly, when they could have done it 100 bajillion times before now. So there's something going on now that has prompted this to be in the top of the headlines, whatever that is, and I don't think Ross talks about it much. He probably doesn't talk about it all in this episode, but he has a question and answer show that he does later in the week, where they do talk about the the UAP disclosure bill that most of the ufologists are in favor of, and like to talk about a lot. And so, some of the ufologists are holding that up as that's kind of the reason that we're seeing attacks like this show up, is because the legislation is back, and there's a lot more proponents of the legislation this time around, and everyone thinks that it's going to happen unless, dun dun dun, the bad guys stop it. The only reason it's going to get stopped is because bad guys step in and stop it. But none of them ever, including Ross and everyone, nobody ever brings on like a congressional expert or like a high-level staffer or anyone who has any experience with the United States Congress and how they pass bills to even look at the language of this particular portion of this bill and give any type of opinion on if it's passable, why it may or may not pass, and what are the major reasons that it won't pass that have nothing to do with ufology or what ufologists want or what they'd like to see in the future. None of that needs to be part of the analysis. They should just really look at the language of the bill. Any of those experienced congressional people, whether they're talking heads on some news station or actual staffers are still working there right now, or maybe if they could get some gold and get someone who works in one of the whip's office to just look at the bill and talk to them candidly about why you can read a bill and tell if it's going to pass or not in its current state, regardless of all the details of the particular industry that's involved with that bill. And no one's done that. No one is going to do that. So this episode is an hour long. It's the nitty-gritty about the Malmstorm incident, and it is Ross kind of holding up the first-hand witnesses in that case as evidence against what the Wall Street Journal was saying, because the Wall Street Journal didn't take on any of the witnesses. It just tried to explain the 10 missiles getting shut off. It didn't take on any of the other details whatsoever. And then, of course, you can't miss out on the first part where Ross is just talking shit about the journalists at the Wall Street Journal. Good stuff. Is it required? It's probably not. This is really just, there's a lot of pomp. There's a lot of pomp in here for, the displeasure of ufology community in general at the Wall Street Journal article, basically saying it's all been a spoof from the Pentagon, which Ross does laugh about briefly around the 5-minute mark or so, where he says that's actually what we've been saying for all time in ufology, is that the government's been lying about the cover-up of UFOs and aliens. But anyways, that only lasts for a little while before he gets back and just hating on them for calling everyone nut jobs. Basically, the whole thing nut jobs. Everything since 2017 is nut job territory.
Is big. It takes a long time to get your head around it. It's not simple. It's not one layer, one level. And the premise, I think, of this article is pretty ridiculous, that all this stuff is from the black world. It's our technology. I mean, look, UFOs 101, UFO kindergarten. You learn that 90 to 95% of all UFOs can be prosaically explained. They're clouds, they're balloons, they're planets, they're all sorts of things, and secret technology. That happens. It does happen. But that's the starting point. That's not the end point. It's the other ones, the 5 to 10% that are left over, that are really interesting. And if the Wall Street Journal is going to suggest that those are all our technology, it's preposterous. I mean, you mentioned about documents that exist that have not been made public. Documents that have been made public make it clear that our military, behind closed doors, in great candor with each other, were saying back and forth, these things are real. They're not ours. They're from somewhere else. We suspect they might be from outer space. They're not Russians. They're buzzing our national security sites, national labs, nuclear weapons facilities. They're not ours. They had no idea when they wrote those documents all those years ago that 20 years later, the Freedom of Information Act would become law, and that all of their documents, the ones they don't shred or burn, would become public. And now they are public. And of course, we did not know what the hell those things were way back then.
Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, Weaponized, the UFO propaganda machine, 80 years of lies and disinformation, episode number 78. Good stuff, classic Weaponized, not a lot of crying over, chicks in Congress. Actually, no crying about chicks in Congress in this one, so. They've been gone for basically 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, when they left for Contact in the Desert, they put up a flashback episode to Weaponized, number 73. The most important man in ufology, most important investigator in ufology, something like that, Jay Stratton. And then the week after Contact in the Desert, nothing. So they basically been gone for 2 weeks. So, in this episode, they got their buddy there. Who is that guy? He's the writer of Ready Player One. But I don't know his name. Dr. K. Oh, that's them talking shit about Kilpatrick. Alright, so I don't know this guy's name. I'll try and look it up and include it in the breadbasket links. But he's the author of Ready Player One and a bunch of other stuff, and he is doing a great job. He's a super fan of ufology and Weaponized and Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, and so he's doing a great job of just popping out the 80 years of lies and disinformation, major points, but also connections and intersections. So it's kind of they're consulting with another ufology expert, sorta. And this is part of their response to the Wall Street Journal. Before they brought this guy on, there was a response to the Wall Street Journal article by George Knapp, basically. And it was really the same as his X post that was very long. He said basically all the same stuff. He didn't really want to read it because he knew what it was going to say, probably because he talked to the writers, because they called him and he answered them, and he knew very quickly from the first few questions kind of the axe that they were grinding. So we talked to him for 15 minutes or so and never talked to him again. So he knew when he saw the article and could already hear what people were saying about the article. He kind of knew, what was in it. So he finally eventually read it, and it was, just as bad as he thought it was going to be. And so he says that he's not nearly as mean about it as Ross Coulthart. Even Jeremy Corbell doesn't really even say much about the authors. He just kind of says, it is what it is, and fuck them. But George Knapp goes into kind of great detail. I bet you, if you did read the article, you'd see that he was kind of responding basically to like each point that they made. And, you know, the crux of his argument kind of boils down to also that they're kind of making a ridiculous argument when it comes to the Malmstorm base. But we can kind of like set that aside, like, sure, because Robert Salas and a lot of people involved with that are considered kooky and kind of not incredible. And it's not even really a case that is held up initially in ufology as like, here's something that's concrete about UFOs and aliens. And that's because of Salas, right? And so there's that. But then he goes through and just kind of, I mean, he must have had like 10 bullet points there of like first-hand witnesses that kind of show that the Wall Street Journal didn't do their homework. I'm pretty sure that's when he called them the parachute journalists. And he said, you know, they barely even scratched the surface of ufology in their article, and etc. So, you know, most of this episode, at least half, you know, has to do with them kind of countering the Wall Street Journal article with their pal here from Ready Player One. And then the other half is them kind of, I guess, reviewing and responding to and discussing all the things that have gone on in ufology over the last 2 weeks. You know, they talk about contact in the desert a little bit, not too much. And so the things that went on over the last 2 weeks are basically Jay Stratton talking more than he has in the past. And you know, Jay Stratton has a book coming out very soon. And then we had the Wall Street Journal article, which we're talking about a lot. And then also last week was the Matthew Brown incident with Elon Musk, which was kind of like a response, kind of teasing Elon Musk sort of about the Trump breakup, which was happening live at that time. And, you know, Matthew Brown is kind of the most recent ufology government insider whistleblower, ufology saint. He actually seems like a pretty good guy. He seems like the least slimiest, the least secret government slimiest whistleblower that we've had in like a long, long time. So he's been out, and then he joined X last week, and I didn't even know that was his grand entrance was to say, hey, Elon, since you have all the clearances and now that you're breaking up with Trump, let's talk about government AI and UFOs, and specifically about what Jeremy Corbell mentions, the PAX, you know, library location and the Amentium Corporation situation there that Lou Elizondo's also talked about in the past. So, in the ufology world went nuts last week with Matthew Brown because of how he wrote his post and how he signed it off with the, you know, cryptic demon name and etc. And I don't even know all the details. We talked about it last week, but I don't even remember all the details. And it went away. It went away probably because of the Wall Street Journal article, and everyone's just been going ape shit on that all week long. And so Jeremy Corbell is in here. He's got they got their other pal here. I can't remember his name, Dan something, but he's like the bodyguard of someone else who's super awesome. So this is another celebrity friend of theirs. He tells, I think, probably like 3 kind of like little UFO stories. And then they get into Matthew Brown and etc. And so there's an explanation here. There's kind of a, I don't know, what do we got here? There's probably like a 10-15 minute explanation here, kind of Jeremy Corbell. Jeremy Corbell offers like a 10 to 15 minute kind of explanation of Matthew Brown's comments and some context to the dynamics of the ufology community surrounding Matthew Brown and his entrance as a whistleblower and his exit from the government as he doesn't work for the government anymore. Which I'd said in a few episodes, I don't even know. Because, like, you know, here he is, given hours and hours and hours of what seems to be kind of like, they're calling him a whistleblower. He's calling himself a whistleblower. So this is insider stuff that's not supposed to be being told to us. And he's not getting in any trouble, doesn't seem like. But I guess that remains to be seen, right? Then they talk about the Wall Street Journal's gonna drop another article that's really highly critical of Lou Elizondo. That's now here he is. He's talking about, I don't know who it was. I think I clipped it out though, but I don't know who it was. Said, maybe it's in the Wall Street Journal article, that Lou Elizondo goes to Jeremy's house to train him in jiu-jitsu, and Jeremy has got this really, uncontrollable, authentic kind of response where he says, Lou Elizondo didn't fucking train me. He came over and swam in my pool. He wasn't fucking training me. And it was a real kind of like, if anyone was getting training, I was training Lou kind of vibe. So it's funny. It's classic. It's an hour long. I think that in the general sense of everything, when it comes to the New York Times article and then now this Wall Street Journal article, that George Knapp's response to the Wall Street Journal article is ufology required for sure. And so in that portion of this video is not very much. So you should definitely be paying attention to what the response is, which is, he's got an actual response, that he penned up and said here, in good 8 minutes, it looks like, of his kind of official response. It's very similar to what he posted on X in response to the Wall Street Journal article. And then also that they have this discussion with their pal who wrote Ready Player One. That is also their response to the Wall Street Journal ad, right? Which is to kind of have an open discussion about all of the disinformation and lying and obfuscation associated with the government and the cover-up and the conspiracy over the last 80 years. And then we have this Wall Street Journal article that says, yeah, but the Pentagon was just doing that to haze noobs.
You had Edward Ruppelt. He was the first head of Project Blue Book. Talked about craft with capabilities beyond anything we could conceive. That's a quote in his book. Is that part of the disinformation program, Wall Street Journal guys? You have CIA documents repeatedly discussing the need to monitor UFO reports as potential indicators of Soviet or even non-human technology. The documents are all there. And then you look globally. And, again, the Wall Street Journal article makes no mention, none, of the international character of this phenomenon, which is quite astonishing because you cannot understand UFOs without going global. The Soviet Union maintained one of the world's most comprehensive state-sponsored UFO programs from the 1960s through the 1980s.
Richard Dolan, Intelligent Disclosure, the real reason for WSJ's information war against UFOs. The Wall Street Journal. All right, Richard Dolan, he's 38 and a half minutes response to the Wall Street Journal article. He's pretty nice about it. He called them a paragon of the establishment. That was kind of the worst insult that he used in the whole video. He said that the two authors have written a little bit about UFOs in the past, but mostly dismissively. So that was his 1-2 right there. Paragon of the establishment. Plus, they were dismissive about UFOs once upon a time. So he's not very mean, right? He's very polite. This is very academic. Then he goes into everything, right? He's got his slides. He says, this is what they say. And this is pretty good. Hazing program, Malmstorm, EMP base, disinformation for secret weapons programs, right? And then he goes through all that and says, well, yeah, but there's all this other stuff for us to talk about in ufology. So for them to say, everything is trash, but they only talk about these little things is kind of nuts. So, I mean, the presentation that he gives here about knocking down UFOs with radar, advanced radar projects, nukes, advanced nuke projects, the complete lack of even discussing anything outside of the United States in the article, which he says is, he says Ufology 202 would be, okay, we're going global. We're going to look at everything in the world, and especially places like Russia, which he has a few slides on, the Russian ufology program. So he has a pretty succinct and detailed and academic response to the Wall Street Journal article saying, well, yeah, maybe the stuff you said has some merit, because that's actually what we've been saying about the United States government, that it's been lying to us and doing disinformation for 80 years. So, gold star for getting that one, Wall Street Journal. It's nothing new to call Chris Mellon or Lou Elizondo or even Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, to a lesser degree, to call them disinformation agents. That's not even new, and that's not even a new part of ufology in any way whatsoever. It's just as old as anything else that we're talking about as far as 2017 and the update and the attack that the Wall Street Journal is leveling here. So even all those things, none of that's new to the ufology community and argument. So he says, they didn't even really do a good job of debunking, especially since they ignored everything else in ufology outside of Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, and the Malmstorm Air Force Base incident. So that is a weak way of going about completely taking out ufology, which was their argument, is that pretty much everything, that there is no UFO and alien sightings that are outside of the hazing and disinfo and secret EMP testing. So, especially since it's so short and because it's got these nifty slides, I would say that this 40 minutes is required ufology. Maybe all the time. It is for the same reasons still required, because when it gets into the UAP legislation. So he takes this as an opportunity to do a slide on the UAP legislation, which he says is a good thing. But here again, just at the very top, tippy top, I've never seen Richard Dolan ever bring a congressional expert in to talk about anything in all of his history, to talk about anything congressional. So always, and he does it here, Corbell and Knapp do it to a lesser degree. Knapp has always said anything to do with Congress is a wild goose chase. And Corbell wanted to do it anyways, because he was, he's new to the ufology thing and to Congress, right? And the early Weaponized episodes was literally Corbell saying, let's go to Congress, let's go do this congressional stuff, we gotta get these politicians involved. And George Knapp saying, kid, come on, that's a waste of time, like, this is nonsense, we're just gonna get strong pushback anyways for doing that, like, we shouldn't even talk with Congress because they're ridiculous to begin with and a wild goose chase. And then we saw Corbell go off and do a wild goose chase, and we saw all of ufology get involved in this UAP disclosure bill, which is pretty much nonsense if anyone was to actually read it. And so these guys are really spending a lot of time and a lot of earnesty to get you involved in, you should also want the UAP bill to get passed because it's good for all these reasons for ufology. Which basically Richard Dolan says, because it's a thing. Not because of what's actually in it. Because it's a thing. because it would actually be politicians voting on it and saying, yeah, we're going to go find out about UFOs. And they would be on record. But no congressional experts, no staffers, no one who's ever been involved in a whip's office, no one who's ever been involved in actually writing a bill that's gone on to become law. And if you read the thing, it looks like something that Jeremy Corbell and his pals put together. A couple of his pals who had been in Congress, maybe, cutting and pasting from other bills. Number one, so the language is weak. In the legislative intent portion of the bill, it never mentions disclosure. It never says our intent is to cause controlled disclosure and bring UFO and alien transparency from the inner workings of the government to the sunshiny surface of the public. None of that is mentioned in the legislative intent portion of the bill. It's pretty weak cut and paste. And there's a lot of stuff in there. So you got to read a lot to see, but they just cut and paste other bills in there. Which leads to a bunch of stuff on purpose that the politicians are going to argue about and chop out. And in the end, it's going to be just like a lot of topics in Washington and in Congress. It's going to be one of those things that's really easy for politicians to go out and support. And it's going to be really easy for politicians before and after to go out and explain to their people who were interested in this kind of cliche, niche topic that the man got involved, the powers got involved, and it got chopped out and couldn't do anything about it. But I was in it with you, and I was in it for you. So it's just one of those kinds of things, especially if you read it, you can tell that it's just one of those kinds of things. It doesn't procure or line out or outline or in any way describe any of the funding that would go on in all of the new agencies that would be created, congressional agencies that would have sweeping congressional authority that at this point is completely reserved to executive agencies. So there's big legal and congressional things in the bill that are just not addressed in any type of specificity to in any way for anyone who does read it, who can read it, to believe that it's going to be voted on and be passed into law. Ever. So it doesn't even matter what the specifics of it are, because the specifics that matter will never allow it to actually be voted on at this point. So that sucks, and it sucks to see people like Richard Dolan or Jeremy Corbell or George Knapp or even Ross Coulthart spend a lot of time talking about it, because they haven't even spent the time to go get one of these congressional experts that I'm sure they could pick up all over the place in their podcasting and journalism. So they could probably get a congressional expert or some type of staffer in there to kind of explain this to them. And they could probably get some that are charismatic enough that they could have them on their shows, but they don't. And that's a major oversight. And that's because they are not political journalists and historians and reporters. And they are getting caught up in the dog and pony show of the American Congress. And then they just kind of move on with their day and go to Contact in the Desert and give a speech about, UFOs being hidden from us since 1947. So great episode. Obviously disagree with Richard Dolan and everyone else in ufology when they say the UAP disclosure bill is a good thing, firstly, or that secondly it has any type of likelihood of becoming a reality and should get any of our energy at all ever. But his choreographed response to the Wall Street Journal article is definitely required ufology. Make sure you get it.